concerns. The pressure to scrutinize it, I think, is very intense. Certainly to draw out the review. I see no reason to think this is going to go through quickly. How it goes in courts is a different question, I think. The kind of pro-competitive impact is strengthening Discover as a competitor to Visa and MasterCard. It's going to be more compelling when it actually goes to litigation, if it does.
Capital One's Discover deal is facing resistance on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers are pushing back on the $35 billion takeover. Senator Hawley, following Senator Elizabeth Warren's lead, taking to social media and writing, quote, "Sounds like the credit card companies are finding another way to screw the American people. This merger should be blocked, and Congress ought to cap credit card rates pronto." Let's now get into this with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horder. So, Anne-Marie, it's not just Senator Warren. It's coming from the other side, too.
It's not. And sometimes in politics, you see interesting people make friendships look across the aisle. You would normally never talk about Senator Warren and Senator Hawley being in the same camp. But when it comes to Capital One and Discover, both of them think that this deal is not good for the American consumer. You heard from Senator Hawley there saying that some of these credit card companies, the rate should be capped. But really what it comes down to is what's the DOJ and the FTC going to do. And what we know from this DOJ and FTC is that they don't really like mega mergers. We've seen that in a number of instances. Most recently, our reporting is that the FTC is prepared to also sue to block the latest Kroger-Albertson deal. So if that can't get through, you have to think it's going to be very challenging for Capital One and Discover to get their deal through, especially on the heels of a 2023 where the Biden administration set a record for breaking up some of these mergers.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, I know literally the first question you asked when this happened was, are regulators, is Congress really going to let this get through? So again, is anyone really surprised with this? Anne-Marie Horder, and thank you so much. Now, we had data crossing the terminal just moments ago. It's U.S. PMIs. Bloomberg's Michael McKee joins us with the details. Hey, Mike, what you looking at?
Well, we're looking at an economy that's still going reasonably well. A little bit of a decline in the S&P Global PMIs for the U.S., but not much. Still in expansion territory, 51.5 for manufacturing. That's good news because it's up a little bit from the 50.7 that we saw the prior month, and manufacturing has been the question mark. Services down a little, 51.3 from 52.5, and the U.S. composite comes in at 51.4 from 52. Nothing to worry about there. Of course, next week we get the ISMs, which matter more to U.S. markets. But in Europe, they care about the PMIs, and it is still a down economy pretty much across the continent. The French and Germans, a lot of 40s there. The Eurozone itself gets a 50 for services, but manufacturing still depressed. And Danny, just to make you homesick, the UK, a little bit better in services, 54.3, but manufacturing still taking the pipe, as they say.
I don't know if that makes me homesick, because it makes me think maybe it's good that I'm not there. If the economy looks like that in services, means maybe there's still inflation. So yeah, Mike, I'm happy to be here in the U.S.
Happy to have you.
Michael McKee, thanks so much. All right, that's the data this morning. Let's look at some of the sector price action and go over to Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Hey, Abby.
Hey, Danny. So not surprisingly, we are seeing very bullish sector composition for the S&P 500 right now, up 1.6%, heading to its best day of the year since November of last year. Not surprisingly, tech, that's the big sector on that NVIDIA blowout quarter and guide, with that stock hitting a new record high, up 3.9%, its best day since May. Now, you can see the other mega cap tech sectors are also higher, including communication services. But if we dig in a little bit more there, we actually have some declines for the likes of T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon. This, of course, on the report of AT&T of wireless disruptions across the country. They're happening in New York, Houston, Atlanta, Miami, Chicago, and Dallas. Some of the customer service representatives for AT&T on X said that they had confirmed that there's a quote-unquote active nationwide outage. Now, there are people on X talking about Verizon and T-Mobile problems, but representatives from those companies are saying that there isn't an outage, that there is not a disruption. So it's going to be interesting to see how this story evolves as the day goes on, Danny.
Yeah, it certainly does. I saw even the San Francisco Fire Department tweeting out saying, hey, you can still call 911. Maybe just find a landline somewhere. Abby, thanks so much. Abigail Doolittle. Coming up, we're going to look at the market-moving events you need to watch this week and next. That's up in our trading diary here on Bloomberg. risk event out of the way for this week. It was NVIDIA earnings, and it turns out not so much as a risk. You got to feel bad for the folks that sold when it was trading around $650. But it is the NASDAQ which carries the mantle. The tide lifting all boats. 2% is where we are on your NASDAQ 100 index this morning. S&P 1.5%. It is tapping a record for an intraday high. Keep an eye on that. But look, it's not equal everywhere. Small caps, those are only up about 0.7%. Okay, let's get your trading diary, what you need to be watching through next week. Existing home sales will come at the top of the hour, plus Fed speak from Philip Jefferson, Patrick Harker, Lisa Cook, Neil Kashkari, and Chris Waller. That's throughout the day. Will they continue to push back like the minutes did Friday? Warner Brothers Discovery, they will report earnings. Saturday, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump face off in the South Carolina GOP primary. And then Tuesday, we have a slew of retail earnings. That includes Macy's, Lowe's, and eBay. Maybe then we'll stop talking about NVIDIA earnings. Until then, that's the countdown to the open. This is Bloomberg.
Minutes into the U.S. trading day on this Thursday, February 22nd. Here are the top stories we're following. The tipping point. NVIDIA blows past expectations amid insatiable demand for its AI accelerator chips. That's boosting the rest of the chip sector and the S&P 500 as well. Meanwhile, EV pain. Rivian and Lucid sitting out the party with both stocks plunging after delivering disappointing outlooks. More on what that might mean for Tesla. And food inflation. Are consumers starting to push back on higher snack food prices? We'll discuss with Mondelez CEO Dirk Van de Put in just a bit. I'm Katie Greifeld in New York. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. And you take a look at these markets right now, there is a lot of green on the screen behind me. The S&P 500 are actually around our record high right now. That index up about 1.6%, and it just gets better as I go along. You take a look at the NASDAQ 100, for example, up over 2%, and that all ties back to NVIDIA also hitting a fresh record high today after last night's earnings, and that's helping out the semiconductor index as well. You can see the stocks up almost 4% at this moment. So let's go from the micro now to the macro, because we are getting some breaking news now from the Fed Vice Chair Philip Jefferson. Bloomberg's Mike McKee has more.
Philip Jefferson doesn't speak very often, so when he does, people do listen, and he has a message for the markets. We could cut this year, but don't expect too much, and that's going to be an important part of the discussion as the easing cycle begins. Jefferson saying, if the economy evolves broadly as expected, it will likely be appropriate to begin dialing back our policy restraint later this year. That tracks with pretty much what everybody else on the Fed has said. He goes a step farther, however, and warns against excessive easing in response to falling inflation. Excessive easing can lead to a stalling or reversal in progress in restoring price stability. Jefferson says he has three concerns out there, things that may influence the outlook for monetary policy. Consumer spending could remain stronger than expected and push up inflation. Labor markets could weakening as growth fades. That's the other side of the argument. And then there's always the geopolitical risks out there that could cause an inflation shock. So he's saying don't count on too much this year, and once we do start to cut, don't count on us going too far.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You take a look at bond markets right now, not too much reaction. The two-year yield hanging out around 4.68%. And again, we are really embarrassed by riches when it comes to Fed speak this week. Who else do we have to look forward to?
Well, we've got Patrick Harker this afternoon, and also Neil Kashkari and Chris Waller, who's always made a lot of noise. Now, all of those are speaking after, well, Harker's before the bell, but the others are after the bell, along with Lisa Cook. She's not speaking on monetary policy, but we're going to get some news that'll trade into tomorrow from some of those Fed officials.
And so we will continue to keep an eye on that. Bloomberg's Mike McKee, thank you so much. Of course, the headline there, the Fed's Vice Chair Jefferson saying that it's likely appropriate to cut, quote, later this year. But let's go back to the micro, and let's go back to NVIDIA, because it is hitting fresh highs today after delivering another eye-popping sales forecast. Here's what market watchers had to say.
What a sensational set of results from NVIDIA.
This is really the earnings heard around the world.
I'll do my best to sort of contain my enthusiasm.
It seems each quarter they continue to surprise.
It's kind of crazy.
The only result that was going to be acceptable was not only a beat, but a substantial beat.
This is a company that continues to execute and completely blow away everybody's most robust forecast.
There is great momentum there.
People are beginning to wonder how many consecutive quarters can this company continue to run with.
The big question has been, how long can this continue?
There is sort of a consensus in the industry to put some competitive pressure back on NVIDIA.
The competition has never been more fierce than it is right now for NVIDIA, but they have a huge head start.
This tidal wave of spend, it's coming to the rest of tech. And in our opinion, that's going to continue to fuel this tech bull market.
The equity market sort of really nicely sort of set up from here.
This AI party, it's just getting started.
And joining us now with his thoughts is Mandeep Singh of Bloomberg Intelligence, the busiest person in the building this week. So when it comes to NVIDIA, supply is improving, but demand is just still far outpacing that.
Yeah, and also their product roadmap. I mean, they talked about, introducing H200, so that's their latest line of processor with almost double the computational ability of their H100. And look, that's where product roadmap is so critical for a company like NVIDIA. I mean, the estimates have gone up 10% this morning from where they were. They were already expected to grow 50-60%. Now it's 70% for this year. So you have to ask yourself, yes, they clearly are executing very well, but the overall semi market still grows 20%. Where is that 70% coming from? And clearly they have the spend to prove. They are putting up great numbers, but somebody out there should be losing, in terms of losing market share. And Jensen called out data center incremental spend around $1 trillion for the next 5 years. So the addressable market is expanding, but clearly, they are putting great numbers and they're executing very well with the product roadmap.
Well, to that point, you take a look at AMD, for example, today. It's up almost 8%. They have a competitor chip, the MI300, and yet they're having a gangbusters day on the heels of these results. Why is that? Is it just because the pie is expanding so much that we're not necessarily worried about who's losing share?
I mean, if the $1 trillion opportunity is true, and Lisa Su said it's $400 billion incremental opportunity with Gen AI. So really, out of the $1 trillion, probably 1/3 is compute and probably similar networking. So there is a lot of incremental opportunity. At the same time, companies don't just raise their IT budgets 40-50%. So that's the argument, like how long can this be sustained? And also, this is not recurring revenue. This company has to keep executing to put these kind of numbers. I mean, they're probably sandbagging for the next quarter. They'll come out and raise another 10%. But I'm thinking 2-5 years out. Is this recurring revenue? Is the refresh cycle going to be annual, or are we talking about a digestion period, which is what we have typically seen with semiconductor chips?
Yeah, some big questions there. It's going to be interesting to see those get answered. But for right now, NVIDIA shares currently up 14.7%. Mandeep Singh of Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you so much. Now, for more on NVIDIA and the markets in general, I'm pleased to say we're joined by Adam Gold. He is founder and chief investment officer over at Chatham Hill. And Adam, you've owned NVIDIA since 2016. Are you buying more today?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. We're not buying this morning. If the shares were in the red, we would have been buying. It turns out over the last 30 quarters that we've owned the shares, they've only missed twice, yet the shares have fallen 40% of the time the next day. So I think the setup here, given the shares had pulled back prior to today, was on the positive side, as you're seeing the reflection in the incredible numbers. But no, we're not buying at this moment today, but we're very proud to be shareholders since 2016.
And so I'm looking through your notes. I mean, you write that this could be a $5 trillion market cap company this decade. NVIDIA is currently at about $1.9 trillion in market cap. What gets us there in the next 6 years? What's your outlook?
Sure. Yeah, we like to listen very carefully to all of the earnings calls. We listen to all the competitors, the customers, the suppliers, and there's been very interesting takeaways the last few quarters as acceleration in cloud CapEx has started to cause this sort of AI arms race, right? Of course, this is a battle for the next big wave of computing, which is AI and Gen AI, riding on the tailwinds of the PC, mobile waves. And what's unique is this is not just an expanding market share story. So as Jensen said on the call yesterday, they're taking share from CPUs, which the end of Moore's law has meant that the processing power has not increased enough to withstand the amount of increase in data. So we're also seeing an increase in the size of data centers and the amount of new opportunities. So we're seeing $1 trillion of data center that will convert towards accelerated computing. That's one of the massive tailwinds Jensen mentioned. The second one is around Gen AI. And what's unique there is that it's not just companies like the large cloud vendors, Meta, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all increasing their spend with NVIDIA. And most recently, even the last few weeks, which caused the shares to run up dramatically prior to the announcement. But it's also an increase in the places where data centers are going. And this is called sovereign AI, as they've referred to this in the last 6 months. And what's unique there is that every country, every local jurisdiction wants to have their own set of AI factories, intelligence factories, as Jensen calls it. And so this sovereign AI could be $1 trillion as well. So the TAM is growing by double the current installed base, just as they're taking market share of the current install base there. So if you think about $2 trillion and thinking about, could they have 25% market share? That's down dramatically from maybe where the shares are today in terms of market share, but 25% is $500 billion in revenue, and 10 times revenue is $5 trillion. We think that's a real possibility here.
Right. Well, meditating on that a little bit longer, let's talk about the competitive landscape. We were just talking about this with Mandeep. You think about AMD, for example, developing the MI300 to compete with NVIDIA. How are you thinking about that? I mean, do you think that those are serious threats at this point, or are you looking at the TAM and saying this is NVIDIA's sort of market to run here?
And certainly they're the leaders in it. They've been pioneering this computing model for many years. AMD has talked about $2.5 billion, $3 billion this year of AI sales. That's how much NVIDIA just increased their guidance by for this quarter, let alone the entire year. So we think second sourcing, and is obviously something every customer will always say to their suppliers, obviously, right, in terms of where the pricing is. But you think about the margins that NVIDIA just posted, it's absolutely incredible. 61% operating margins. This is really unheard of in terms of profitability. So most likely, obviously, pricing is, supplies are constrained. Companies are going to look for second sourcing. There's obviously internal chip development at all of these cloud vendors. This is something we've thought about very thoroughly over the past year, especially as some of the new announcements have come from Microsoft. Amazon's working on theirs. Google has announced theirs. It has worked on theirs for a long time. But what's unique there is those are single source solutions for those companies. Those don't work across platforms. So if you're a developer, we think about the VC ecosystem of new startups. They want to create their apps and their programs that work across as many devices, across as many platforms as possible. And so NVIDIA has a very far-reaching ecosystem, and that ecosystem is very sticky for their partners, for their resellers, for their go-to-market customers. And so that means the competition of a single-source chip, such as these cloud vendors, might work really well for one of their own applications. So in Google's case, their TPU processor. But you don't hear a lot about TPU processors going, Microsoft is not buying those. Or, so I think the opportunity here is that the pie is growing so large, the TAMs are growing, their market share might decline again. Think about 25% market share of a $2 trillion market. Well, that's $500 billion, and the company is going to do $100 billion in revenue this year. So that's 5x in terms of revenue.
Right. All right, well, Adam, it's great to catch up with you. Really appreciate your time. That is Adam Gold. He is founder and chief investment officer of Chatham Hill. Now let's take a look at what's moving now in the markets. We're going to do that with Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz. And Bailey, we're actually not going to talk about NVIDIA for a couple minutes.
We're going to ignore the S&P 1, Katie, to focus on all of the other companies that had earnings.
Yeah.
Starting off with Wayfair, the e-commerce company that focuses on home furnishings, beating expectations. Analysts harping on the fact that they took a note from Mark Zuckerberg's year of efficiency. They cut costs, so that's driving profits. So when you look at their results, profitability is the key focus for analysts. They're beating expectations on that. That's why Wayfair is up right now 7.5%. One thing when you keep in mind with Wayfair, it's still down close to 85% from that 2021 peak. But intraday basis, if you bought ahead of earnings, stock's up.
Yeah, there you go. The bar was low, but it is interesting. You think about the Home Depot results, people obviously not moving around in this housing market, but still needing to buy furniture. Tell me about Moderna. That's a name I haven't talked about in a while.
Haven't talked about it in a while, Katie. Another one that is down 80% from a peak, but beating expectations, taking some market share for those COVID shots in the fourth quarter of last year from Pfizer, so beating expectations on their COVID shot sales. Sam Fazeli, BI's calling out the fact that it was a surprise profit that stood out to him. Shares up right now 8.2%, so it does seem like maybe they're eating up some market share from rivals like Pfizer. One thing to keep an eye on, though, with Moderna, expansion of their pipeline, RSV vaccine and studies, their cancer vaccine still very much on the earlier stage of things, but could be a driving factor for that company.
Right. That still, of course, is the big question for the likes of Moderna. How do you expand beyond just COVID? But quickly tell me about Royal Caribbean Cruises. You've got 3 gainers today.
Yeah, 3 gainers. Again, as you mentioned, a lot of green on the screen. Biggest jump since July, boosting its outlook. Bookings are stronger than expected. That's leading to rallies across across cruise liners. Carnival up more than 3%, as is Norwegian Cruise. So it does seem like people may be wanting to take advantage of 2024, even if there's concern around consumer spending, by getting out and taking to the seas and going on a cruise for a vacation. Personally, not a big fan of cruises. Haven't been on one. Don't want to be on a ship, but people are.
I would say I fear the ocean, so being locked on a boat, I don't quite get it. But Bailey, thank you so much. That, of course, is Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz. Now coming up, Mercedes-Benz pumping the brakes on the EV industry, bracing for lower sales. We're going to talk about the future of the industry up next. This is Bloomberg.
I don't think anyone had ever thought that the once-in-a-century transformation of the auto industry would be a straight line. There will be peaks and troughs, and things like build-up of charging infrastructure and other enabling factors also will determine how the market develops.
All right, that was the Mercedes-Benz Group CEO speaking to Bloomberg earlier this morning after the company walked back its EV targets. Now remember, earlier Rivian broke the news that it would be laying off 10% of its staff. It also delivered a disappointing forecast, and so too did Lucid. So joining us now to help break it all down is Bloomberg's Craig Trudell. So when it comes to Rivian, when it comes to Lucid, what's the path forward for these companies? Because taking a look at the share moves this morning, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of hope out there.
Yeah, it's a really ugly day for Rivian in particular. I think, of those two, Rivian really looked to be sort of turning a corner last year. They really had a sort of blockbuster public offering in 2021. They had a lot of challenges with their production ramp. A lot of that was supply chain related. They seemed to be sort of overcoming that. I think the fact that they're, taking some time off this year for a changeover to their sort of next generation platform means sort of short-term pain for hopefully some long-term gain. But of course, some investors aren't going to be thrilled with that, especially when, even with that, expected pause, there was an expectation that the company would increase production from last year. They're basically saying they expect to be flat this year, which was just not what the investors were looking for.
And I have to admit, I don't know what a Lucid vehicle looks like, but I see Rivians on the road. I see those trucks with those interesting headlights. You take a look at what the company's saying. It's going to prioritize cost cutting over volume growth this year, as you explained. I mean, we've already seen them come out and announce layoffs, 3 times in most recent history? Is that more of what we should expect here?
I think the fear is that these companies are just burning way too much cash, and that is something that absolutely unites them. I think, Lucid as well is in a position of really, having to sort of, get its cost in order because it's losing so much money, and, you have a real question as to just, how sustainable the way these companies are running really can be. And so with Rivian, I think, they're trying to bring costs more in line. They're trying to get to a place where they're a healthier company once they are able to bring, less expensive vehicles to market. Lucid is playing in a very different space, and I think really having challenges with the 6-figure electric vehicle market. There's just only so much volume to go around there, and they've really had challenges with being able to hit their numbers as well.
All right, Bloomberg's Craig Trudell, thank you so much. And you take a look at Rivian shares right now, currently down 26%. We'll see how that one develops. But let's turn to another developing story, and that's AT&T working to address widespread disruptions to its mobile services across the U.S. The cause of the disruption is not yet known. Let's get the latest now from Bloomberg's Todd Shields, who's been following this story. And Todd, what do we know thus far?
We're a couple hours into this. It started early in the morning. We know that there were outages reported in major cities, including New York City, Dallas, a few others. And we're waiting for more information. When it will be resolved, we don't know. Exact number of customers hit, we don't know. We do know that AT&T shares are taking a hit, down a little over 2% right now. So we wait for more.
And what precedent do we have for this? When it comes to AT&T, have we seen this scale of an outage before?
It's been a long time since we've seen anything like this. There was an extensive failure in 2008 at AT&T. There have been failures with other companies from time to time, but nationwide seems to be unusual, perhaps because few companies are really of the extent of AT&T. So it's an unusual outage. It affects, including 911 services in some cities. So it's being taken seriously. We've asked federal authorities what's going on, and we wait to hear from them.
All right, Todd, really appreciate your time and your reporting. Stay close. This is a developing story, of course. That is Todd Shields of Bloomberg News. You take a look at AT&T shares right now, as Todd said, currently down about 2%. But let's move to another breaking news story. Of course, Bloomberg learning that Goldman's Beth Hammack, once seen as a top choice to be the next CFO of the bank, she's calling it quits after 30 years. Bloomberg's Sridhar Natarajan broke the story, and he joins us now. And I feel like we've seen a spate of Goldman executive departures over the last couple months. What do we know about Beth Hammack's departure?
Well, this one's a little different, largely because the larger issue at stake here. And let's be clear, across Wall Street, there has always been concern about lack of women in senior leadership roles, which is why Beth Hammack and her career trajectory at Goldman was different. For the longest time, she was always put forward as one of the likely candidates to break into the top tier at Goldman Sachs, potentially seen as a CFO a few years back, but once she was passed over for that role, she was still tipped for other roles that would come her way. Goldman has an all-male top tier. In its 155-year history, there's really never been a woman at the top of the firm. No CEO, no CFO, no board chair, like no president. Like these are roles which have solely been occupied by men, which is why it has been a point of interest at the firm and elsewhere to see when that actually starts to change. You've already seen that change to some extent at other firms, but Goldman is a trailblazer in many other ways. So you would like to see that change at Goldman Sachs, and people have been paying attention. So when someone like Beth Hammack leaves, it certainly registers inside the firm, and people pay attention to that.
Well, like you said, I mean, you look at the top brass of Goldman, and it's largely all male. So with Beth leaving the firm, I mean, who should we be keeping an eye on? Who is actually in the ranks to potentially take her place or beyond?
This issue has resurfaced at Goldman recently only because just last month they created two different committees. Goldman is a place that loves to operate by committees, and they, inside their investment bank, across their trading division, across the banking division, really the two critical businesses at Goldman Sachs, what it is known for, they created a group of emerging leaders who would have a say in the running of the firm. That's 25 executives. Only 3 of them were women. With Beth Hammack's departure, that drops down to 2. That doesn't paint a very pretty picture, and that is why you sort of recognize that they need to make some changes. They need to figure out how to improve that pipeline, because at this rate, you're not going to see rapid change at the top.
And so let's talk a little bit more about Beth Hammack specifically, because she's only 52 years old. I mean, that's decades left of her career. Do we know where she's going?
From what we can gather right now, she'll probably take a beat. She'll figure out what she wants to do next. But if you spend 30 years at a place like Goldman Sachs, you can be rest assured that there will be a lot of people in the market who would be keen to have you at their firm. This is a story that's repeated at Goldman Sachs every year, on cue, each and every single year. Beth Hammack had been there for 30 years, started in the trading division, or at least grew rapidly within the trading division. Once she became partner in 2010, she was part of TBAC, the longest serving chair of TBAC, which is an influential advisory group to the Treasury Secretary. She's been a banker for the last 2-3 years, so she's had experience on both sides of the firm and 2 critical divisions of the firm. So you can be certain, and we have Katie Koch, the CEO of TCW, saying that you can be certain that wherever she lands next, she will have a fantastic leadership opportunity.
Oh, big time. She is entering the job market with a strong resume. Like you said, 30 years at Goldman, maybe off to Garden for a couple of months, but we'll continue to follow that one. Of course, our thanks to Bloomberg's Sridhar Nagarajan, who broke the story. And of course, it is time now for Social Climbers to look at the stocks making waves on social media this morning. First up, Boeing ousting the head of its 737 MAX program, Ed Clark, stepping down immediately after nearly 18 years at Boeing. The move less than 2 months after the mid-air blowout that led to increased scrutiny at the U.S. plane maker. Now, next up, we do have Etsy in a bind, the online marketplace missing earnings estimates. The company says it was a, quote, slow start to the quarter. And finally, of course, we do have Google today announcing a pause in its Gemini artificial intelligence image generation feature. The tech giant says the feature showed inaccuracies in historical pictures. And of course, this is just the latest hiccup in the company's efforts to catch up with rivals OpenAI and Microsoft. And it comes on a day, of course, where we're focusing big time on AI hardware, of course, after NVIDIA's blowout earnings. Of course, you can follow all the latest company buzz on TREN Go on your Bloomberg terminal. Now coming up, cocoa prices are surging to record highs. That news is anything but sweets to consumers' wallets. We're going to talk about rising food prices with Dirk Van de Put, Mondelez International CEO, up next. This is Bloomberg. All right, one stock we're watching right now is Nestle, the snacking giant, posting disappointing results in its latest quarter. For more, we're joined now by Bloomberg's Natalia Knižević.
Thanks, Katie. So the stock has dropped to a 4-year low. The company posted disappointing outlook. They see organic revenue of about 4%. The expectation was for 4.9%. And of course, if we compare it to a previous year, it was at 7.2% last year. This is a story about inflation. Nestle CEO said on the earnings call that unprecedented inflation increases pressure on consumers, and of course, it impacts demand for food consumption. Of course, when we talk about inflation, we can talk about different categories, but I would like to talk about snacks. It was one of the biggest stories during the pandemic as people were stuck at home. But now, as after the pandemic, we saw that prices for snacks started to grow, and now they keep moving higher. This chart shows CPI for U.S. snacks. And of course, as a result, many producers, they keep rising prices. Recently, we've heard from one of the global biggest companies that produces snacks, Mondelez. They said that they will keep rising prices mainly because cocoa prices keep rising. And we know that cocoa prices have recently surged to a 46-year high. So Mondelez reported earnings growth was positive, but it was different across different regions. The biggest growth was in Latin America, 28.6%, followed by Europe, Asia, Middle East, and the slowest growth was here in North America. Of course, we should take a look at the picture in terms of how the company delivers products and consumption overall. If we look at the company's presence across different markets, we see that European market is the largest, 36%. This is followed by North America, Asia, and Latin America. So, Katie, higher prices, inflation still impacts consumer behavior.
All right, Natalia, thank you so much. And let's keep this conversation going, because for more, I'm pleased to say we're joined by Dirk van de Put. He is Mondelez International CEO. Dirk, it's great to have you with me. And as we were just talking about, you think about in January, Mondelez said that it's going to be raising prices on some of your products. Of course, the price of cocoa absolutely skyrocketing. The price increases that you're putting in place now to deal with that, how does that compare to previous price hikes? What kind of magnitude are we talking about here?
Well, if we talk about our global range, all our products, which includes 50% of biscuits, it is lower than it was in previous years. But if you look at the chocolate price increase, that's going to be high single digit, in some cases double digit. That is in line with what we had to do in previous years. So unfortunately, I wish it was different. Our input cost keeps on going up. Some are flat, some are coming down, but cocoa, sugar, in fact, also, and hazelnuts are the ones that are going quite high, and they're important in our product. So we unfortunately have to increase prices again.
And how willing and able are consumers to take on those price hikes? Because, I mean, I love Oreos, but you probably can't live off of Oreos. So how much pricing power do you actually have left?
Well, up to now, we have really not seen any effect from the price increases on our volumes. Our volumes have been solid. We've had volume increases that were the same as before the inflationary period. So price elasticity-wise, the consumer has accepted what we had to do so far. Going forward, I assume they can deal with another round of price increase, particularly if you talk about our major brands, and I'm talking about our chocolate brands here, Milka, Cadbury, Toblerone. They're so close to the heart of consumers that I believe they will be prepared to see through this next price increase. It's going to be the same for all chocolate, so it's not that just going to be our brand, it's going to be all brands. So I think that will help. But hopefully, anytime soon, this inflationary period of our cost increases will stop, and we will go back to a more normalist situation.
And it's a good point there. The brand loyalty, the brand recognition for some of your companies is definitely strong. I do want to talk about distribution a bit because it appears that Mondelez, you're focusing on convenience stores, warehouse clubs. Are those the types of channels that you're pursuing, and how do you plan to succeed there?
Yes, if you look around the world, we are not distributed or represented in all channels in the same way. Or if you look at a geographical spread of a country, it might be that we are not in all stores. So a big driver of our growth is to optimize our presence in the channels where we're underrepresented or increase our reach geographically of presence in different stores. If I go to the first one, the two big opportunities for us are convenience stores in the US, where we're underrepresented, and the bigger warehouses, the discounters in the US and in Europe is the other big opportunity for us. Geographically speaking, it's in emerging markets. For instance, in India, we believe that we can still go to another 3 million stores in the country to have our products present. And I will add a third opportunity for us, which is in the store where we are already present. We can improve, increase our presence. We can have a better quality presence. All that to point out that for us, the opportunity to keep growing as a company is quite big.
Right, and of course we are having this conversation against a fraught geopolitical backdrop as well. Of course, Mondelez still operates in Russia, and let's talk about current events. I mean, Alexei Navalny, of course, his death, has that led to renewed consideration of Mondelez exiting from Russia?
Well, it's first of all, since the beginning of the war, we have condemned the brutal aggression against the Ukraine. So we are absolutely against the war. But as it relates to operations in Russia, unfortunately, there is no real simple solution there. It would be easy, or we could be clear to say that if stopping our operations in Russia would stop the war, we would definitely do that. But unfortunately, that is not so straightforward. So we believe that the vast majority of our investors understand what we're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is that we believe that the risk of exiting Russia and what would happen to our business and how it would be used is much higher than staying, continue to operate locally, scale back our operations, and make our business more standalone. So it's a very difficult balance. It's not easy. It's probably one of the toughest issues that I face as a CEO, but we believe that this is the best solution